Daniel Beveridge helps lead innovation for the Office of the CTO at VMware. He has 23 patents and 17 more filed as an accomplished inventor, including storage caching, business value-based hypervisor scheduling, instant cloning for VDI, and several tablet technologies for the modern workspace. As a multifaceted leader in engineering innovation, Daniel has built a reputation for introducing breakthrough designs in areas including virtual desktop infrastructure storage design, user interface, and ergonomics, data center efficiency, and cloud brokering. Daniel's futuristic yet practical ideas have shaped VMware's current and future end-user computing experience. He now oversees xLabs, VMware's intrapreneurial accelerator, sharing his knowledge to help guide the next generation of innovators. Daniel, thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome. Great to be here.
Daniel, you recently joined IEEE and became an impact creator. What was the desire? What was the impetus behind this movement?
Yeah, so, as I've moved on in my career, I'm getting more interested in passing the torch along to other innovators. When you start early in your career, you're really focused on maybe doing the innovation, but as you gain wisdom along the way, you start to be more reflective on the process of innovation. And, I've realized that I've got insights to share, and I'm interested in helping other folks coming along in their innovator journey. And the IEEE Impact Creator is a great way for me to do that. I look forward to posting more articles and thoughts there this year.
So you help lead innovation at VMware's Office of the CTO. What emerging trends are you all seeing right now in the industry?
Yeah, great question. It's a very active time. There's a lot of innovation going on. We're seeing trends in data becoming more distributed, the movement toward the edge, as we call it. First generation of cloud was very centralized, and now we're seeing these new use cases emerge where a lot of data is being generated at the edge, whether it's IoT or other reasons. Data is being generated and collected, and people want to process it. So there's a lot of analytics, innovation, machine learning, and generally the infrastructure around creating that distributed cloud.
And what's a specific example of one of those applications, if I'm trying to put that into context?
Well, the obvious ones that you hear about, right? Driverless cars, smart cities. You need more compute in real time that's distributed to make these decisions. These systems that are emerging, driverless car being an example, they generate tons of data, too much data to send back to a central location for analysis. So people are thinking about ways to have data depots that may be co-located with charging stations or other places where this roaming edge is evolving. And people want to do as much insight harvesting as they can as soon as they get access to the data. And there is a centralization process that will occur for the longer term valuable data, but it's more about building a pyramid where the insights are harvested quickly in real time, and then data that's valuable for trending gets pushed upstream to regional collection points or up toward the centralized cloud providers. So it's really a kind of a data and insight hierarchy that's emerging and being mapped on top of the new infrastructure technologies, including 5G, edge computing, and all of that kind of infrastructure layer that's needed to support the data and insight layer that people want to build.
It must be pretty exciting being tapped into the cutting edge of what's going on at the edge. What is that like being part of that team dynamic?
Well, it's very exciting to see great innovations come through. We have a lot of fantastic innovators internally. We see really just amazing proposals come through from our employees. We also are doing work, with partners, technology partners. In some cases, doing work with academic partners, and really looking ahead to what are the next breakthrough technologies emerging, and how do they map onto VMware's areas of strategic focus.
And if I'm not mistaken, I believe you help oversee VMware's internal accelerator. So you're helping guide and mentor some of these inventors as they're pushing these ideas forward. What do you do in that capacity? How do you frame that feedback that you're giving and help support them?
Yeah, so we have a program called xLabs that's part of Office of CTO, and xLabs is our incubation program. We fund a series of projects in parallel that typically range 6 to 18 months in length. And they're smaller teams, let's say 3 to 5 people who are passionate about pursuing a big idea. The first thing we need to do is assess if the idea maps to something we want to invest in. So we have our key areas of business alignment that we assess. Then we check if it's technically feasible. Is there too much technical risk, or is it something that we're willing to take on? There's always some amount of technical risk and business risk, but we have to assess if that's manageable, if the team is the right team to deliver it. And once we've cleared all those quality gates, we fund a project and move it forward. We also give supervision to that, engineering supervision, product management, product design, and really give the innovators what they need to be successful. So at that point, they start executing on their idea, and we continue to engage with them through the process. And the ideal scenario is that we graduate these projects and they're consumed by one of our business units and become part of our existing products, or potentially launch new products or new markets in some cases. So that's the ideal scenario. Along the way, we pay attention to the innovator's journey and make sure that as they come in, they are getting the mentoring they need. Sometimes we need to pivot the idea or recalibrate the project in some way. So we give them support through that process and help them set their expectations realistically in terms of what they can accomplish with the time and resources that the program is offering them.
Is that a difficult conversation that you have with these people? I'm sure they're very passionate about their idea when they bring it to you, and they're excited when it gets picked up, and it could be hard to make that kind of pivot. What does that conversation look like?
Yeah, that can sometimes be a difficult one. So part of maturing as an innovator is gaining the understanding through experience. Sometimes it's the school of hard knocks, but gaining the experience that you start with a big idea and you're passionate about it, and sometimes you do need to tune it, you need to downscope it, or calibrate it a little bit to the left or right from your original one in order to be successful. Part of what we try to impart to our innovators is that this isn't their last opportunity to innovate. Right? Really, this is the beginning of a journey. So they don't necessarily need to fulfill all of their objectives for us to consider it a very successful project. So they start to get into a new mindset that they're generating value, and this is the beginning of a journey, and not that they have to meet all their accomplishments in the first cycle.
Yeah, and you probably know that from your own personal experience of being an inventor. You have quite a number of patents under your belt, I believe. Remind me how many?
Yeah, I do. I've been through ups and downs. I think those colored cubes behind me are some of my VMware patents. But as an inventor, as someone looking for new idea opportunities, you eventually figure out that only a certain percentage of them are going to make it into product. However, inventing new ideas can also be very valuable to the company in other ways. Can give us confidence to move into a new area, knowing that you've got some legal coverage. They are also sometimes used defensively in negotiations with other competitors when disputes come up over IP. There's various ways in which intellectual property gets used. It's not as simple as it always landing in product, although that's always fun and the best outcome.
Now, when you talk about your own inventions and some of them working, some of them not working, of course, one of the main tips I've heard in the past when it comes to startups, when it comes to anything new, is fail fast. Do you have any other advice for people who are out there trying to launch their own innovation?
Yeah, I always hear fail fast, and I understand where it comes from, lean startup thinking and everything, and I endorse that. But I tell you, sometimes you need to persist and be patient. I think sometimes people fail fast for the wrong reasons, and they don't try hard enough to really make sure that the idea isn't valid. And sometimes, idea is not valid right now, but you circle back in a year, as the market changes, as the technology evolves, and it's the right time to pursue the idea. So while failing fast is valuable so that you don't overinvest in something that's not going to get the outcome you want, it's also important to keep your eye on the way the landscape's changing. And sometimes you circle back or you reinvent the idea in a way that's appropriate to a new context. So there's been cases where I've done that, and it's been a better fit at a different time.
So besides timing, is there any other ways that you've seen failing fast not being the right answer, that they should have waited, they were reading the signs wrong?
Well, failing fast is sometimes imposed by the program. So the program decides that we don't have confidence to continue to invest in this area. So it's important that the program itself has the right criteria for an idea failing fast. Sometimes more work needs to be done on business alignment to determine that, yeah, while the original idea should fail, there's a better version of that idea that we've discovered by doing additional work aligning with the target business unit. If the program is not doing that kind of investigative work, around a project, it may be failing fast against its original charter, but that may not be the best version of that idea, and there may be something that's shifted that opens another door where you can pivot the project rather than fail it. So it's really incumbent upon the program and the innovators to keep an eye on that and make sure that it's failing for the right reason.
Well, and now that I'm hearing you say this, I've actually had a couple of projects fail in the past, at least during my initial attempt to try to start it. And I think it was because I approached a big organization and I pitched an idea, but I hadn't done the groundwork to set up those relationships. And I think sometimes these larger companies, these larger organizations get so many points of contact, get so many people, and they don't know necessarily the qualities of the people trying to put that idea out there. And a couple of the times, not every single time, but when I've invested time and followed up and established those relationships and built some rapport, then I've noticed that it has been accepted. So I've experienced what you're saying as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, failing fast is again part of this lean startup model that people have in mind when they think about innovation. But when you do innovation at a large company, it's not quite the same as a startup. It may be framed that you're doing a startup inside the company. You're not actually doing that. You have the full resources of the company at your disposal. You can go to subject matter experts. You can play a bit longer of a game. You can park an idea and resurrect it a year later. These are things that startups don't usually have the luxury of doing. So we try to calibrate our methodologies around funding with that in mind, and not be sort of beholden to the constraints of a lean startup when we're actually operating inside of a large tech company.
If you had to identify a couple of the skills that made you successful, either as an inventor or someone helping lead the innovation, what would you say that those are?
Great question. Yeah, I think a lot about that myself, and I continue to learn about my own processes. But one of those things is, really, I think learning to play chess early on. It was as a child, my father taught me to play chess, and I look back and I think it's a great skill because it teaches you to think ahead and do sort of semi-real-time decision tree analysis about the various possible outcomes that occur and the different paths you could take to get to the objective that you have, in the game. But those map well to a thought process where you hedge your bets. Sometimes you're investing in two possible paths to get to the same outcome as you would in chess. You're thinking several moves ahead. You're doing risk assessment on what could happen on each of those paths of the game, so to speak. And when you're doing investments in technology, you're thinking about the way the technology landscape can unfold. There's several possible paths that, let's say, cloud could evolve on, or pick edge analytics could evolve on. This competing trends for a while. You don't know which way the industry is going to go, but you can hedge your bets. You can pick the most promising candidates, and you can build a strategy that allows you to take advantage of either of those outcomes. So it's a way of thinking really about modeling the way that the future is likely to unfold, and then mapping your investments and the way you're approaching technology, in that against those outcomes.
Which brings me to, you took a very unique path to engineering through your studies. I found it very interesting and very atypical, what you decided to major in and what you decided to pursue intellectually. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I learned to program early in my teen years because I really wanted to make video games. So I got my first computer when I was 11. I learned BASIC, and I was off and running, just absolutely in love with developing, and ended up writing accounting systems and accounting system modifications before I was even out of high school. So that was really like something I enjoyed doing. When I went to college, I sort of wanted to become a bit more of a Renaissance man and fill out the gaps intellectually. And I still wanted technology to be my focus. But I think the first year, I really became enamored of the humanities. I went to a school, Reed College, that had a real emphasis on the humanities and the liberal arts. And I got exposure to that, reading the great cultural books in the Western tradition, and also got the opportunity to look at religion and philosophy as well from an academic perspective. So what are the different methodologies that are used by academics to think about and model religion, whether that's the philosophical theology, sociology of religion, and other disciplines, phenomenology, anthropology, psychology. So there's different lenses, and that was very interesting to me because I'd grown up in a fairly religious home, and I was quite interested in being thoughtful about my own beliefs and the way that I would transform them. And seeing these new tools gave me fundamental new insights, and maybe the overall meta insight that we all sort of operate in this cage of the architecture of our thought that we're comfortable with, that we grow up with, or that we just take as normal. And until you're willing to look at that from multiple perspectives, you don't really see the assumptions you're making that they're not facts, they're axioms that you're making or taking for granted. So when it comes to innovation, the pattern of thought where you make the assumption that there's going to be several different ways of looking at, let's say, a technology architecture or a way of thinking about a technology solution, it gives you a way of sort of assuming that there's going to be another lens that is going to yield different insights. Whether you're comparing complex architectures of thought like religious or philosophical systems, or complex technology architectures, they all have certain sophisticated mechanisms to support risk, the outcomes that they have, the internal defenses of those thought systems. And innovation is often around seeing the things that are being taken for granted that really no longer hold true. And that is true in storage systems, that is true in religious belief systems. And so getting in the habit of mind to assess those assumptions, be comfortable questioning them, be a bit of an outsider by design, and really taking that thought process to technology. That allows you to get insights into the different ways that, the gaps and the possible solutions that could exist that people aren't thinking about because maybe they're too comfortable within, the cage of belief that they're living in right now.
And what I'm hearing from you on this is similar to what you were saying before about chess. It seems like you're talking about taking a step back and having some perspective of the overall situation. So whether it's looking at all the different possibilities, or whether it's taking a step back from the innovation and trying to see trends, trying to see, again, different possibilities, pathways here, but it's being able to it reminds me of meditation, where you're not experiencing the moment, but you're considering what your experience of that moment is. Is that
Yes.
what you're saying here?
kind of the meta perspective. Like, is there a fundamentally different way to look at this problem? I'll give you an example that brings it home. You know, in the Western theological tradition, people had debated, you know, so many things in terms of what's true and what's not for, you know, hundreds and even thousands of years. I was particularly interested in and did my thesis work at undergrad on Blaise Pascal, who was a mathematician, invented probability theory really originally to help out be a better gambler, because he was into gambling. And so probability theory was sort of formed around giving him an edge at the card table. But he eventually became religious in his later life, and he applied it to religious questions, and he applied probability theory to a fundamental religious question like, should I become Catholic or not? And it was the first time that probability thinking had been applied to a question that was previously considered the only way you could answer it was, is it true or not true? So Pascal's wager argument was really sought to calculate the odds, risk, and reward of each path, being a Catholic or not being a Catholic. And I thought that was so interesting that he could apply a fundamental different philosophical approach to an age-old question. And that led to a whole tradition of American pragmatism. And you know, the probability theory developed as well into new areas of mathematics. But that's an example of where you take a look at an old problem and you bring a new lens to it, and you realize there's a fundamental new way to process this problem and come out with a different solution.
Okay, there's two questions I ask at the end of every interview. One of them is, what is a difficult time in either your life or someone that you know that you took from just dealing with a hardship, having to reset your career and turning it into a better future potential opportunity?
Yeah, absolutely. There was a period in my career after 2001, after 9/11 actually, where I found myself at the end of a long-term contract that I'd been in, and it was very difficult to find work. It was just a difficult time in the economy after 9/11, especially for tech. I ended up going into a new role, at a mortgage company and taking over IT for them. And I had the opportunity to, build everything from scratch. And I decided to, take a futuristic perspective. And at that time, there was this new technology emerging called virtualization, which is VMware's technology. And at that time, I didn't know much about it, but I thought, you know what? That just seems like it's in the right direction to create a software abstraction layer over top of physical hardware. And so I really immersed myself in it, and I ended up building out our entire company in 5 states using ESX. Back then it was ESX 2.0. We're up to 7.1 now. At that time, that was very advanced and aggressive implementation. But that gave me a really whole new lens on how technology was going to develop. It was very clear that these new abstraction layers were very powerful and would reshape the whole landscape for compute infrastructure. And that has played out over the following 15 years or so. That time also allowed me to bootstrap my career in a new way. And I ended up going into virtualization consulting for 5 years in the New York City area, and did a lot of early work on virtual desktop that got picked up by VMware, and got to work with some of the larger customers implementing virtual desktops. And so that was a very exciting journey. I was able to kind of get ahead of a trend that I saw emerging and become an expert in one of those areas. So the confidence to identify those trends, get in early, become a subject matter expert before the market's crowded with experts, and help write the playbook for that next phase. And that cycle competes over and over. And I think it gets back to our previous comment about being able to think ahead on, several moves ahead, see where technology trends are going, where they're converging, and invest yourself, just a bit over the horizon, just a bit ahead of the current reality.
Daniel, these tips are fabulous. What is the best way for us to continue following your work?
Yeah, so I am not prolific on social media, but follow my account on Twitter at Daniel Beveridge, and also on my LinkedIn account. You'll see I post there now and then.
I always love listening to your insights. Thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. If you enjoyed this episode, please click like below and also subscribe to see future episodes.